I'd also like to start by thanking the Portuguese Ministry of Education and the General Directorate for Education for the very kind invitation for me to be here to join you today. I'm really delighted to be here. So, as has been mentioned, to introduce myself, I'm a learning scientist. I've been involved in digital technologies and education for more than 15 years now. I'm based in University College London, and I also work consultancy work for UNESCO and the International Research Centre for Artificial Intelligence. And in my presentation, and it'd be nice, can we have my presentation? Thank you. In my presentation, I'm going to be taking a critical studies perspective to digital technologies and education. So, is this a clicker?
Yes.
This is good. Okay. So, to begin with, I'm going to talk a little bit about open education resources, or OER. So what do we actually mean by OER? Well, this is how UNESCO define open education resources. We have teaching, learning materials, lots of different types. They're in the public domain, or they're released under an open license. They're no cost to the user, and they can be reused, repurposed, adapted, and redistributed by others. So in short, OER are educational resources that are truly freely available and free to use. In fact, OER have been around actually a long time. This definition was written more than 20 years ago. So, OER are often thought of to have these 5 R characteristics. So we have R for retain, so making, owning and developing, controlling the content itself. Then we have R for revise. We can edit, adapt, and modify. We have R for remix, being able to combine resources to create unique and novel things. And we have R for reuse, using the original in different ways, in ways that people are not familiar with using necessarily. And then redistribute, sharing the resources more widely. But OER also come in many different forms, such as open courseware, open textbooks, open videos, open access journals, and also open online tutorials, and of course, what we're really here today to speak about, open digital education resources. So, in fact, the point is about digital education resources is the way in which they can be used, the way they can be repurposed. But what actually are they? What do they actually comprise as well? So we have learning management systems, which were used to collate and allow students to get access to materials. We have online teaching platforms, such as Moodle and massive open online courses. We also have blended learning, where we're combining the digital with the practice actually in the physical classroom. We also have online tools, and lots of teachers are using these things like Mentimeter, Padlet, Miro, which allows you to actually do lots of quite unusual and innovative things online. And then, of course, we have e-textbooks, simply electronic versions of traditional textbooks, but because you can do electronic things, you can search and you can find things very, very quickly. And then, of course, we have mobile learning, so the use of mobile phones and iPads and the like, so that learning can take place outside of the traditional classroom. But then there's also learning analytics, which is collecting lots of data from when the students are using the tools and analysing that data, which can then inform educators, learning designers, and also policymakers. And then, of course, we have virtual reality, which is becoming even bigger, where you often have to wear the goggles, and you can it allows students to be in places that they couldn't normally be, like perhaps in the middle of a volcano or inside a human heart. But you can get access to these environments and see things that you can't see otherwise. Then we have augmented reality, which is similar, but this is where you overlay information on top of images. So you can hold your phone up, for example, at a range of mountains, and the AR can give you the names of the mountains very, very easily. Lots of different ways in which this is being used. Then we have adaptive learning, using computers and using artificial intelligence, so that the way in which, the order in which, the pathway that the students are learning is adapted to the individual. I'll be talking more about that. We also have digital badges and gamification, the use of digital tools so that as the child is doing something, you use the badges to encourage them to continue to motivate. Exactly the same way that you get all those kind of things in your ordinary computer games. And then, of course, we have digital games-based learning, which is a core part of what we've been talking about today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So what we're doing here is just trying to, this is the context we're in, and then I'm going to be looking at the future a little bit. So, digital game-based learning then, it's been around really since the 1980s. Although what's called digital game-based learning was actually entered the popular imagination with the publication of this book, Don't Bother Me, Mum, I'm Learning, which was done in 2004. And since then, there's been a huge amount of academic research, and much of that research has argued that games are really effective in supporting learning. But all the same, games are still not that common in classrooms. Maybe that's going to change. So we have this kind of thing. So the question I want to ask first is, what kind of things do we have in games? What is it that makes a game a game? So to begin with, we have, they involve a make-believe environment. They usually have rules, so they can't just do anything that constrain and limit what you do. They have tasks that require effort. They don't just happen easily, they do things. They have explicit aims and explicit objectives. There's feedback. There's scores. There's virtual or real competition. There's a lack of consequences. And there's also a very important element, there's fun. And all these elements together is what makes a game. But what about games applied to learning? So, in games that we use for learning, what we're doing is we're combining stories, imagery, sounds, with the challenges that we have in ordinary games, with choices over actions and goals, with adaptive feedback. We allow the child to escape to an alternative reality. We give opportunities for them to discover and acquire new skills and abilities. And hopefully they can achieve a sense of achievement and feel mastery and empowerment over what they're learning. Incidentally, this picture is a game from my own PhD research. So then we have, if the games are potentially so powerful for learning, the question is, why don't we use them in learning more often? Here's one of the first reasons. is because a lot of people think that you shouldn't combine games, fun, with learning. Learning is hard, is an activity we have to do, and games trivialize it, make it seem silly. There's good arguments both for and against that. But not only that, it's also challenging to find good games that actually can be used in classrooms. Games that address the actual intended learning outcomes. They should support the learning, not dictate the learning. Games that appeal to the students, because they have their games at home and then they come into class and there's new games, but maybe those games aren't as good. Maybe they're different games. And games for which there are sufficient supporting materials. So, in short, we also have to think about the infrastructure behind the games. Now, if you're a teacher, there's nothing worse when you're dependent on a technology and the technology stops working in the middle of your class. What do you do? How do you address that? So it's really important that those infrastructure issues are also dealt with. So the reality is that, games can be used, but there are problems. And one of the other problems is the fact that they're unusual in classrooms. So teachers often don't have any experience using the games, how they work, or how they might be used to support their teaching. So teachers need opportunities to familiarize themselves with the game in question, because every game is different. And they need opportunities to plan how that game will fit into their teaching. They also need to be confident that the game actually does what it claims to do, that it will genuinely support the learning. Because it doesn't matter how exciting and interesting and attractive the game is. If the teacher doesn't think there's a benefit, then the teacher's not going to use the game, whether or not the game does things useful. If they don't believe, for example, it's going to reduce their daily workload, or doesn't believe it's going to support the students in their learning, if it's going to compromise what the teacher is trying to do in their teaching, for all these different reasons, these tools, the games, are just not going to be used. And sometimes the games get used as like a virtual babysitter. So I've seen classrooms where the teacher says, right, you go and use those games. We don't know if any learning is happening because we're not looking at that, but it means that the teacher has a little bit of space so they can do something else. But this is not a good way to be using games. We also need to distinguish between the game as a piece of software, the small g, and the social system of interactions that players can engage with in and around the game, which is referred to as the big G of game, the big G game. So this involves opportunities for dialogue between students, for making connections to other aspects of the lesson being taught, and for interactions extended beyond the classroom. So it's not good enough just to have the game. You've got to think, how does that game fit into what the teaching you're trying to do and how you're working through the curriculum? So well-designed, small G game experiences can lead to learning, but it's the big G game that can lead to deeper learning and can enhance transfer of that learning to the wider context. So, what about the future then of digital learning, digital technologies and learning? Well, as you've been mentioned, one of the big pushes is the use of artificial intelligence. And to begin with, what artificial intelligence can achieve in general is pretty amazing. So it can beat the world's best player at Go. It can automatically identify diabetes from scans of the back of the eye. And it can help protect us against fraud. Those phone calls you get, have you used your credit card in that store? And you know you haven't. That's not a person working it out. That's a piece of AI technology. So all these complications, all these amazing things are why I I have huge respect for our AI colleagues, our AI engineers. But the reality is, AI is not as good as we're led to believe. So it does some amazing things, but it's also profoundly limited. So in this example, we were told when the pandemic, the COVID pandemic started, that AI was going to help solve everything. And the reality is it didn't. It really didn't. So little tiny things, but most of the studies, as this one, none of the thousands of AI models were of clinical use. So don't believe everything you read about AI. It is amazing, but it's not doing everything that we're led to believe. So what about AI in education then? Well, in my opinion, AI does bring some amazing possibilities to education. And there are many, many people out there who would talk all about those amazing things, because AI in education is a $5 billion market already. There's lots of money being made. So I'm not going to tell you how great AI in education is, because, in fact, sometimes you might think I'm being a bit negative. But I like to think I'm taking a critical perspective, constructive perspective on AI in education. Because I don't want to be another cheerleader for AI in education. Instead, my focus are the very many challenges and making suggestions for a human-centered future of AI and education. So, in fact, if we take a step back, the connections between AI and education are more complex than many recognize, and there's a lot of hype, a lot of exaggeration. So to help navigate that complexity, I'm first going to explore some of these connections in terms of 3 buckets. These breaking things down into simple things helps me. So my first bucket is learning with AI, which includes the student supporting, teacher supporting, and system supporting AI. And then we have learning about AI. So how does AI work? What are its techniques, its technologies, useful things for our students as they move through their future lives to understand what it actually does? And the third, though, is what I call preparing for AI. So how do we make sure that we're ready? What this means, what does AI mean on our future lives? And for me, the connection between AI and education cover all 3 of these areas. So I'll start with learning with AI, and I'm going to focus on system supporting. So AI is already being used in many different ways, for recruitment, for financial planning, for admissions, and so on. And a lot of that stuff is pretty similar to AI in many other organizations. The problem is that these are all amazing in different ways, but they're not really my area of interest. So I'm going to move forward, actually, to talk about learning with AI that's student supporting. And there are many different types of this, and I'm going to rush through them very quickly just to give you a feeling for how complex this area is. And this is where all the money is. If you want to make money, get involved in this. So firstly, we have the so-called intelligent tutoring systems. And the list on the right there, that's a list of multi-million-dollar funded companies around the world today who are already making lots of money out of this. And the idea is that the student engages with what's on the screen, and the AI monitors what they're doing, and depending on what they get right and what they get wrong, that determines the individual pathway of the individual child. The logic is that the adaptivity helps every child follow their own individual pathway through the material. But then we have dialogue-based tutoring systems. So these are similar in some ways, but the idea is that the student and the system have a conversation. So it's based on the Socratic approach. Then we have automatic writing evaluation. And these are tools where you plug in the assignment and the AI does the marking. Yeah, I'm not convinced by this, by the way. These are used a lot in the US for access to universities, but they're really quite problematic. We also have learning network orchestrators, and I was explaining this earlier today. This tool is really interesting, comes from Beijing in China. And unlike the previous tools where the AI is the expert and giving the information to the student, in this, it's not like that at all. When the student comes out of a class, they've not understood something, they call up an app, and the app allows them to connect with a human tutor based on the information of the student. I don't understand osmosis. They put that into the app, and then they get connected with human tutors. They have then a 20-minute one-to-one conversation, just sharing screen and voice for child protection reasons. But it's amazing. And the AI there is not particularly sophisticated AI, but it's facilitating a conversation between human and human. So I like that. Then you have language learning apps. I'm using Duolingo at the moment in a pathetic attempt to learn French. And where this is different is that they're using natural language processing to actually identify whether the words you're saying are good. Another big one are chatbots, and these are being used increasingly. And this, again, is another quite interesting use. So for a university in particular, for older students, if they don't understand something, want to find out, where is my next lesson? Where do I have to hand in my assignment? When is the examination taking place? You can use this, and they can be quite useful. So that's the student supporting AI. But what about teacher supporting AI? Well, the reality is there isn't much of it about at the moment, because all of the focus has been where the money is, which has essentially been developing those tools I've been talking about. But there are some. So this one was developed by friends of mine at IRCAI, and it connects back to the OER we're talking about. So using this tool, you can go onto the internet and you can find pieces of OER that are relevant for what you wish to do, what your students need to do. Because one of the problems I should have mentioned earlier with OER is that there is so much of it out there, it's really hard to find the bit you want. And not only if you find the video, well, there's a 30-minute video, where's the bit in the video that you actually want your students to look at? Well, this tool can help you do that. But there are others. There's this one from IBM, and there's also one from the Lebanon called the Clever Owl. So there are a range of things doing this, but this is a very limited approach to AI supporting teachers. I did come across this one the other day, and this one is using AI to mentor teachers. So I don't know the details about this, but I think it's quite interesting. It's there to give support to teachers as and when they need it. So that's learning with AI. What about learning about AI? So we have, at UNESCO, we've been developing, collating from around the world different tools and activities and programs, OER essentially, that any teacher can use to teach their students about AI. Then in the US, they have this AI for K-12 approach, which uses these 5 big ideas they call AI and perception, representation and reasoning, learning, natural interaction, and societal impact. So they're attempting to do this and looking at, what are the skills that our students need so that they're prepared possibly for getting a work in AI or simply for understanding how AI is impacting on their lives. And of course, most universities around the world talk about AI. And then from Finland, there's this course, which is open access, another OER for anybody who wants to learn about AI. And of course, there was the MOOC that the DG did last year, which is explained to teachers how AI and education can work together. So there's a lot of resources around on AI and learning about AI, but it's still complex. And what it doesn't do is talk about the third bucket. It doesn't generally, this information, these courses, don't really look at, well, what does it mean? when we're engaging with AI. So it's not enough to think just about the technology, but what about the human impact? Because AI is having a massive human impact. So there is some places, like this is an institute in New York, and they are doing some of this stuff, but there isn't a lot looking at the AI hype, the AI biases, the fake news, impact on privacy, impact on human cognition. So this is an area of research, but apart from that, it's not happening a great deal. Now, I've talked about my 3 buckets. My second one was learning about AI. My third one is preparing for AI. And you might think, well, surely they should go together. And, you know, the reality is I personally think they should go together. Because the teaching of AI, in my opinion, needs to bring together these 2 very different areas, the technologies of AI and also the human impact of AI, the impact of AI on human cognition and so on and so forth. And so I think they should be interwoven, as this picture attempts to demonstrate. So if you're teaching an AI course in a school or a university, you shouldn't, for example, just talk about face recognition as a technology. You've also got to talk about it in terms of its impact on people. So why do I separate them? Well, the reason being just to make sure that we don't forget the human impact. So I keep mentioning the AI hype, and I've got an interesting one here I wanted to show you. We've looked at the impact on COVID, but this one is quite fun as well. So this is for you all to think about. What do you see here? Okay, it's a panda, right? And the good thing is that the AI says it's a panda. So this is object recognition by AI. Impressive. It identifies a panda. And not only that, it is 57% confident. I'm sure that's a panda. Okay, so then what do we do? If we add this noise to that picture, merge those 2 together, we get that. So what do you see? You're seeing a panda, right? We're humans. We know that's a panda. And now, fantastically, the AI is almost 100% confident. Problem is, it's now confident it's a gibbon. So my point is that AI is very brittle. It can work in perfect circumstances, but as soon as the circumstances change a little, all we did was add a little bit of noise, the AI collapses. There are many other examples like this. And so then how do we take that then, those ideas, into education? To begin with, I'm going to look at some of the claims by many of the companies. So how about this one? The idea is that AI and education tools are intelligent. The word intelligence is in the title, right? Artificial intelligence, right? I have to tell you they're not, okay? The AI tools in education and AI generally is not intelligent. No AI system today comes anywhere close to human intelligence. And no AI in education system today comes anywhere near close to the intelligence of a human teacher. So let's get that out there. You know, we don't need to think about that. In fact, the AI in education systems, what they do very narrowly can be impressive, but it's not intelligent. Sometimes they might appear to be intelligent, but that's very different from actually being intelligent. And sometimes it's smoke and mirrors that we have to be quite careful to get through. Another claim about AI in education is it's going to save teacher time, right? In fact, this is a claim that's been made for 100 years about technology in education. So 100 years ago, B.F. Skinner was developing his tool, and it was going to save teacher time. Okay? It's nonsense. It doesn't do that. Of course, AI is different, and it's going to... we know that's not true. Now, I talked about assignment marking earlier. And I teach in a university. When I go back, I have 25 essays I have to mark, 5,000-word essays. I would love an AI tool to do that for me. There is no such thing. And anyone who says otherwise is living in a strange world. Another one is this notion of personalization. So AI will personalize. But actually, I worry about that. Again, personalization has been around for a long time, but it's kind of re-emerged recently from Silicon Valley. And the argument is if we can have personalized viewing on Netflix or personalized purchasing on Amazon, why can't we have personalized education? Well, I have to tell you that in my experience, most teachers have been personalizing their teaching always, right? This is what they do. And so actually to say, well, now we're going to newly personalize learning with the AI technology is not really true. And the AI technologies, they can personalize the pathways, but as this diagram tries to point out, they didn't personalize the outcomes. So it's not AI personalization tools should probably be called homogenization tools. And it forgets about collaboration. It forgets about the social coming together of education. Those tools might be useful for homework, but one of the things I don't understand is I've seen classes where you have 30 students, 30 laptops, all being personal, and ignoring the student sitting next to them, ignoring the teacher. That seems to be crazy for a school system, a schoolroom, which is, by definition, a social space. It also undermines things like intuition, independence, creativity of our students. We need to be very worried about that. We need to be very careful. And then, of course, the method that these AI tools use are instructionist. They are behaviorists. They are repetition, practice. An extremely, primitive approach to learning. Of course, that approach has its place in learning and teaching, but it shouldn't be the whole thing. But if we depend too much on these AI tools, then this is all we're going to have. So we need to be very, very careful. These tools also, it's about spoon-feeding information and trying to prevent students failing, making mistakes. But we know actually making mistakes can be a powerful way to learn, so long as you then pick up and look and go further forward. And what we can end up doing is disempowering teachers. But for me, the teacher is still the most important person in the classroom. And these tools shouldn't be about disempowering teachers. Shouldn't be saying this tool can do better than a teacher because they can't. And instead should be supporting the teacher. The other point I worry about is that in putting these tools into classrooms is it's a commercialization of teaching and learning through the back door because of these big, powerful companies and this $6 billion industry that I mentioned. And there's lots of myths as well. So there's this myth that if we use AI with a student, we can detect the student's emotion. I read an article only yesterday that was new evidence, the New Scientist magazine. This doesn't work, okay? These tools cannot detect emotion. Now, I'd been in part of this. I was in a project 4 years ago. We were trying to detect emotion. And the logic is good. The child's in a bad emotional state and they're not learning. We want to put them to a good emotional state to help their learning. But it's nonsense, right? This is folk psychology that simply doesn't work. It also, even if it did work, it's crossing a boundary of privacy, trying to look inside the child's head. There's also taking it further to attention monitoring. So this kind of thing, this is happening in a Chinese school, but the technology was actually American, and it is being used in America. And it's nonsense, okay? So these kind of things that you see happening around the world, we need to be very careful. But it's not just there. It's in exam monitoring. So during the pandemic, a lot of examinations went online, and lots of companies, the so-called e-proctoring companies, made lots of money selling their products. People were so worried, how do we make sure students don't cheat in exams? I have a solution for that, is let's not give our students exams, let's assess another way. But anyway, they use these tools, and these tools just don't work. If the student just looks up at to think for a second, that student is cheating, they've got something written up there. If the student, their eyes don't focus, the student is cheating. And it particularly is bad, still being used for students of various disabilities who find it very challenging perhaps to look and focus for a long period of time. So again, these are mythological. We need to be very careful. We need to make sure they don't happen. So I think what happens is we start with the AI and then we look for the problem. That's what's happened so far. And what we should be doing is swapping that around. We should be starting with the problem. What is the educational problem that we need to identify? And who are the best people to identify those? Well, educators, teachers. And then once we've got the problem, then the AI experts should be using their expertise to solve those problems, not solve the problems they think exist. This is a classic techno-solutionism. So what happens is we think we have a problem. So in some rural areas of developing countries, there are not enough teachers. So there's the problem. So what do? We put AI in, but actually that's the symptom. What's the real problem? The real problem is the lack of the qualified teachers in the first place. And so perhaps what we should be doing is we should be ensuring that we have better professional development for teachers in those contexts. So let's identify what's the real problem, not just the symptoms of the problem, and work out where we should be pointing the technology. Here's an example. This is from the UK, and this was just a couple of months ago. What was the problem? The problem they identified is when children queue up to pay for their lunch, they spend a minute waiting in the queue. So instead of that, we'll do face recognition. We pay automatically. For me, that's a terrible approach. We're using face recognition of our children in the classroom. What's that all about? Another route would be to say, well, how do we stop children wasting their time queuing for paying for their lunch? Easy answer, stop them having to pay for their lunch. Sorted. We don't need the technology. What we need is to get in there and do things properly. Now, you've heard me moaning a great deal about these technologies. And even if you think my moans are unfair, the one thing that is absolutely key is that there's no evaluation of these technologies out there. I lie. There are a few, a very small number in America, but not in Europe. So you only have to go on the evaluations that the companies say, we have experimented and we have shown this, rather than independent, robust evaluations. So we need to be very, very careful. We need to ask for different evaluations. Now, having said all of that, maybe I've been too negative, maybe I've been unfair to my computer science colleagues, because what they have achieved is pretty impressive, right? And the equivalent of they've climbed to the top of this mountain with the technology, with the challenges that they've had to do. But the problem is their results are quite questionable. So they often reduce student agency, they often are intrusive, they often not personalized but homogenized, they often undermine teachers and teaching. And what they miss is actually this bigger prize in the background. The bigger mountain of possibilities that AI might actually help. So rather than automating poor pedagogic practices, AI developers need to leverage AI's amazing capabilities to innovate teaching and learning with teachers, without compromising pedagogy, without compromising human values, which is happening far too much. We need to develop new AI approaches that empower teachers, not say we can do it better than the teacher, because they can't. We need new approaches that genuinely support inclusion and equity. And we need to do all of this for the common good, rather than just enabling commercial companies to go ahead and do things. So here's one example. Why don't we have this for teachers? So this is an exoskeleton that the person can put on, and so they can lift really heavy weights. So where's the AI exoskeleton for teachers to help teachers do what they want to do, what they have the expertise to do, better in the classroom? So, in conclusion then, open digital education resources are definitely important additions to the teacher's toolkit, without question. They can do some amazing things, but only, in my opinion, if the teacher stays in control. Your advantage here in Portugal is that you guys they've been developing these games that this forum's all about today. And what you have to recognize is that makes you ahead of most countries in Europe. And that's really important. And also the MOOC that I mentioned earlier. Again, you're in the advance of most countries in Europe. Almost all countries, I'm saying most, I don't know any other countries that are doing this. France have done a little bit, but others I don't know. The point is, what you have here is really good, and you should be pleased and proud. It's groundbreaking stuff. And so while for teachers, you might think, well, I don't need these games in my classroom. I don't need to do this. I know what I'm doing. I would urge you, try them. Explore them. See how you can use them. Find out what their strengths are for you, how they complement your teaching, how they support your students. And when you identify things where they don't work, not just technical, but pedagogical, speak to these guys and make sure that the next versions improve. And with regards the artificial intelligence in education, I'm not saying that it's always bad. I still believe that there is some amazing potential. But what I am criticizing are current applications of AI in education and the way things are currently developing. In my opinion, we need to change that trajectory. AI is beginning to have an impact in classrooms. There are many places around Europe. Flanders, for example, the area of Belgium, have just implemented AI across all their schools for one particular product from one particular commercial company. That worries me. Because it has the potential, in my opinion, to transform education for good, but if we're not careful, and if teachers are not in control, for bad. So we need to avoid, as I've said, automating poor pedagogic practices, which most of the AI tools do. We need to use the power of AI to develop innovative approaches to teaching and learning that address real problems. We need to empower teachers and provide them with professional development so that they can decide which AI tools, which digital tools can help them in their classroom and how they can best use them. And we need to move forward to make sure that the use of AI in education supports education, empowers teachers, supports student agency, and moves forward for the common good of all of us. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Wayne, for your enlightening presentation and for the important reflections and perspectives that you brought to this event.
We would like to ask you a few questions, if it's okay. And the first one would be, well, OER have been developed throughout the world for some time now, bearing in mind that the profit is the student learning. That is a very important goal. Are there lessons already learned that you could bring up to our forum that are related to this development of OER?
Yeah, I think for me, we have to think of these technologies for what they are. we have to think about what they can achieve, and we have to take advantage of them. So the idea of them being the part of the teacher's toolkit, something they can draw upon, because they're not always useful. When they are useful, they can be profound. But I just re-emphasize that thing, that the teacher must retain the control of the situation and decide when is the appropriate time to use these tools. So I think there are huge opportunities. I think the challenges are around how you can fit this in. As I say, one of the big things is infrastructure. And if you're using them in classrooms, it can be awful as a teacher when you're all ready to go and then suddenly the technology stops working and you've got 30 students. How do you deal with that? It's very challenging. So making sure those things are in place are important challenges to overcome, and making sure that teachers have the opportunity to play with the technologies, to explore what they can do in their own time, and to get professional support development so that they know the different innovative ways in which they can be used. But none of that's easy. But I think, at the end of the day, the possibilities are immense. Because what can be achieved really does help different students in different ways. Now, I showed you briefly an image from my own PhD research, and what I realized when I started was that I was building this tool for all students in the classroom. Where it was useful was for those students who had struggled, who had had difficulties, and for them it was profoundly useful. That little extra push to get over the hill. For the average students, they're fine, they're fun, a little bit different, but they're not that essential. But for a core group of students who, for a very wide range of reasons, are struggling in the classroom, for them, these tools can be a lifesaver, can transform the way they work.
Thank you. Lina?
Thank you. Wayne, as you know, Portugal is investing in the production of OER to support the different subject areas. Can you emphasize some challenges and opportunities in such a huge endeavor?
Yeah, I think the challenge is trying to cover everything. That it's the curriculum is immense, and the curriculum changes. Even in mathematics, which even mathematics curriculum changes. And the trouble is that when you build a tool where you embed things, it can slow those changes down. If the tool is doing great things, why would we want to change the curriculum? Because then getting that balance right is very difficult. I think the other challenge is what I mentioned in my talk, is ensuring that the tools are actually addressing what teachers believe are the important things that need to be addressed. But I think there's opportunities in that, is bringing the two groups together. Very often we have the technologists who are, experts in technology and developing, could be games, could be AI, whatever it is, and we have experts in the classroom we call teachers, and they speak different languages, and often, how do they come together? And so one of the things we were chatting about earlier is the idea, you might have heard of this, but maybe not, a thing called a Babel fish, which is a science fiction story with a fish you stick in your ear. And so when you guys speak Portuguese, I hear it in English. And when I speak English, you hear it in Portuguese. And we need that between our two groups, between the experts of technology and games and things, and the experts in the classroom. We need them to be able to speak together. So I kind of sometimes see that's my role. I am a Babel fish and try and bring these two groups together.
Okay, thank you. As we move forward with the scaling up of OER, what piece of advice would you give to the Ministry of Education, to heads of schools, to teachers, students and parents? Could you highlight one piece of advice to each one of them?
Well, when the Ministry of Education is your host, it's quite difficult to be challenging, right? But I do think it comes down to this connection, this communication. So I thoroughly recommend that as you go forward for the other 270 whatever, the ones that are still to be done, that you do try and bring teachers into the conversation as early as possible. And sometimes you're going to have, very cynical teachers, right, who just don't believe this is useful for them. But you need to go through that pain, I think, to get that conversation going. And identifying, where are the challenges in the classroom? So if you're teaching a particular topic, teacher, where are the challenges? Where is it that perhaps our technology could help? So it's doing it that way round, I think, is really, really important. So that's my advice to the ministry. To teachers, my advice is give it a chance, right? These tools could be useful to you. Sometimes when we learn anything new, remember when you learned to drive, right? How difficult it was. And now you drive and you forget, oh my God, I've driven for 20 minutes and I've not been thinking of anything of my driving. It's automatic. And that's the same when you use new technology in the classroom. It doesn't fit with what you're used to doing. It's challenging, but you need to kind of put the effort in. And sometimes it can be really worth it. Sometimes it won't be worth it, and you'll make the decision, this is not appropriate, it's not doing what I need. And that's fine. Maybe your colleague down the corridor, it is appropriate for them. So I think for teachers, it's give that chance. Where were we? Parents. I think, this again came out of my PhD research. I realized that actually my game that we developed wasn't that successful in itself. It did what it's supposed to do. It gave the students the opportunity to learn about fractions. But where it became really useful was it became something around which to hold a conversation. So that the teacher could talk about the game to the student. The teacher could talk about the game to the teaching assistant. The teacher could talk about the game to the parent. The parent could talk about the game to the student. Now, they weren't speaking maths, they were speaking about a computer game. But actually it was profound because the conversations they had that the game made possible. So I think for parents, they look at a computer game. This is not how I learned when I was at school. We didn't have games. This is ridiculous. You're wasting my child's time. Again, give it a chance and use it as an opportunity. Play the game with your child. Get the child to show you how to play the game. And it's through that the learning is beginning to happen. It's through the conversation. This is why the personalization is such a problem, because there's no communication. But getting the children to work, to communicate with their parent. In this game, you do this. No, Dad, that's wrong. You don't do it like, you do it like this. It can be fun. It can be enjoyable. It can be interesting. Yeah.
A piece of advice for students? A piece of advice for students?
The students. But it's interesting for students because students at home, they have their Xboxes, their PlayStations, their iPads, and they are playing games where the budget, is $1 million, right? And they're complicated and they're exciting. They have noises, and then they come to school and they see a very simple game. And sometimes that just undermines it, and they think, well, I don't want to do this. And some children, in my research, they like to have a division in their lives. So at home I have fun and I play games. At school I do the serious stuff, learning. And they don't like it when you muddle the two. And I understand that. And we shouldn't force them. And for some students, they just don't like playing games. For me, that was a big shock. But actually, I came across children who they prefer playing football or climbing trees or walking in the park or whatever. And playing a computer game wasn't what they really wanted to do. But again, the advice I would give to them is give it a go. You don't know. It could be fun. It could be useful. And one of the things I think is cool if they can use them on devices, on their phones. And so they're on the bus going to school. They can spend 5 minutes playing a game. I do this on Duolingo. I'm sat on the bus. I'll do 5 minutes on Duolingo. It's nothing, right? I'm moving forward half a millimeter a year on this. I'm very slow. But it's still adding to it. So I think, yeah, take advantage.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Wayne, we have one last question to you, and it concerns the future. What role do you think artificial intelligence would play in the development of these kinds of resources? What kind of feedback it will be necessary? How sophisticated it will be?
I think this is a really important question for me, and the answer, it depends on you, right? It depends on whether you are prepared to accept the big companies coming to you and saying, here it is, here's the AI tool, use in your classroom. Or whether you say, no, we want this to work in ways that support us. And we have that conversation. So it's really important. And it's challenging, right? Because they've got a lot of money. We have a lot of expertise in education, and we need to build upon that. But we have to make sure. So my gut feeling is, while for homework, the AI-driven student supporting tools can be useful, for classroom teaching, I'm not convinced. But yet, are there possibilities for tools that support a teacher? I'll give you one example of a tool that might be useful for a teacher in a classroom that I've not seen, which is if you want your students to work in groups, okay? Very simple. You've got to get your students to work in groups. Now, either the students sit in the groups they're always in, or maybe you want to have the students in groups according to what they did last week and what you know about they did for homework. But for the teacher to work all that out will take them 5 minutes. Now, 5 minutes is not a long time, but 5 minutes in a 30, 40-minute class is a long time. And it happens frequently. And as a consequence, teachers don't use that kind of way of teaching and learning that often because they think, oh, there's so much preparation I have to do, which I understand. But so why don't we have a tool that just does that? Bang. Here are the groups. And the groups that it develops are based on the information that the teacher has given to the AI tool previously. And it can be this student has done well in this subject before, or it could be this child didn't have breakfast this morning. It could be a range of things. But, and this is the key, the AI tool might make the groups, but the teacher should then have the opportunity to say, okay, but I want to put that child there and that child there and that child there. So I don't agree with you, AI. I'm in charge here, not you. But then next time, the AI now has that extra piece of information as well. So the next one might be better for the teacher, might be more useful. So it's about making sure, in my opinion, that the conversations between educators and our computer science colleagues are productive. And I was explaining to Carla and Leila about, mentioned I'm in the International Research Center for AI. They're all computer scientists, and then there's me. Right, a little educationalist. And I'm constantly having to remind them of things. That's what we have to do. Because the tools are powerful. The tools are coming. We're not going to stop them. Right? It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. The tools are coming. We just have to try our best to make sure they're the right tools doing the right things for the right people.
Okay. Thank you very much, Wayne, for participating in our forum.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.
It was a privilege to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.